I've got no, sorry, I have a very loud voice, I don't really need the microphone. I'm used to working in boarding schools and men's top security prisons. Before English heritage. So, no film show, but I have tried to dress as a Victorian barmaiden would have dressed. To go to work, she'd have had to wear her own clothes. They didn't provide any uniform. So in winter, they would have worn a full woolen dress, Victorian, very uncomfortable boots, a shawl. In winter, a felt gook, but in summer, this is a summer one cotton gook. And this pattern is in fact a St Austell pattern, because every mine had their own design for gooks. Gook being a Cornish word for bonnet. Right, and here begins the lesson. In 1851, the census for Tardreth parish shows 618 households, of which 413 had at least one person working at mine, with another 52 households somebody doing mine support work. It wasn't uncommon for the Balmaidens to walk up 3 miles to reach the mine. Some walked as far as 5. In summer, their day was 7 in the morning till 5 at night, and in winter, dawn till dusk. At sampling, when the ore was dressed and had to be assayed for pricing every month, they started at 6 in the morning and may not have finished until 8 in the evening. Overtime was sometimes available, so not unusual for them to work an extra couple of hours after 5 o'clock. The working week was Monday to Saturday lunchtime, with a half day on their monthly payday. The only full day's holidays they had were Christmas Day, Good Friday, and Parish Feast Day. And the Parish Feast Day at Tardreth would have been for the Feast of the Church. As I say, women wore their own clothes for work, and the gooks provided some protection from the sun or the rain and the wind, but also from the flying shards from their work on the dressing floor. So however dirty or wet they were wearing the same clothes from getting up in the morning to going to bed at night. They reported to the tool house on arrival to be issued with the necessary tools for the day, and then at the end of the day, returned their tools. Even if they lived nearby, their crib would have been eaten at the mine, usually about half an hour at midday. In the early years, there was no shelter, no crib house, or even drinking water provided. In cold and wet weather, they'd find shelter in the smithy or the dry. The dry was where the underground workers' clothes were dried. In later years, Foy consoles had an oven large enough to contain 200 pasties, which you provided, and benches to sit down, but they deducted a penny a week for the use of this. And no records have been found anywhere that mentions toilet facilities appropriate for women and girls. It's all right for the men, you can go behind the shed, can't you? Foy consoles, the average wage of over 300 females during 1837, I repeat, 300, was 16 shillings a month. Many didn't earn enough to buy their daily bread. And with great fluctuations in copper and tin prices, it wasn't unusual for their wages to be reduced. From 1840, barmaidens at Foy consols paid a penny from every 5 shillings they earned for a sick club. Full-time male employees had been paying into a sick club for some years before that. It wasn't considered necessary for women to pay into a sick club because they weren't permanent staff. Although a hospital for miners was set up in Redruth in 1863, there were no facilities for women until 1890. In the early days, women and children would sit on the ground in the open air to sort the pieces of washed ore, which would just have been tipped out in front of them. Two girls would manage a barrow designed to carry 1.5 hundredweight between them. If wet, it weighed considerably more. Of the jobs that were done on the dressing floor by women, cobbing was breaking down the ore stuff with a short-handled hammer while kneeling at a 12-inch square stone cube or seated at an iron anvil. Bucking was considered the hardest task, carried out by women on the dressing floor to reduce the cobbed ore stuff to a small granule and powder. Women stood at a bench, sometimes standing on a small platform, in order to keep their feet and legs free from debris. Some wore kitty bags, which I am not. These were flannel bandages, and they helped protect their legs. And bear in mind that this wasn't provided, they had to provide their own. Women would sweep the ore stuff from the accumulated heap onto the anvil with one hand and pound it with a bucking iron with the other. This hammer weighed 3 or 4 pounds. It was so difficult and demanding that this was the first process in the copper mines to be mechanised. Women regularly suffered permanent damage to their left hands due to misdirected blows from hammers, bruising, cuts to fingers, and even fractures. The unnatural and demanding postures of many tasks women did, along with the repetitive nature, took their toll. Some tasks provided no opportunity to exercise their lower limbs all working day. Muscular strains were common from carrying and the awkward bending and twisting postures required. They also suffered from rheumatic problems where their legs and feet had been wet or damp all day. Lung disease was rife in society in general, but in the dusty air of the mines, many women contracted bronchitis and tuberculosis. There were additional health hazards for women working at or near the arsenic calcinators. Women's problems were rarely discussed in polite Victorian society, but Mundic water, which I'm sure most of us have heard of Mundic, with Mundic blocks, is arsenic contamination. This caused monthly problems and also anemia, and also caused sores to the mouth, the wrists, and the ankles. The noise generated by the bucking and the cobbing was tremendous, and where steam or water-powered stamps were in operation, workers couldn't hear each other speak. So women sometimes developed their own sign language to communicate at work. One can only imagine what that should be. Boy consols girls filling the bubble strips might shovel 15 tons in a day. This heavy work often caused their shoulders to be deformed. Accidents were not infrequent, and probably the most serious injuries and death for women involved machinery. The great engines, crushers and stamps were generally not made very safe, with only cursory arrangements for blocking off dangerous moving parts. So once drawn in by their rather ample clothing, there was little hope of surviving terrible crushing injuries. There was a cavalier attitude to life and limb, indicated by the casual way accidents involving women and children were reported. Women, when injured or killed, weren't always afforded the dignity of identification in public reports, and that's assuming that they found their way into public reports in the first place. In contrast, men and boys were named almost without exception. Sadly, few records survive for lead ore dressers. All Cornish silver was extracted along with lead ore. Great Crinnis mine at Charlestown was one of 11 mines producing silver in any quantity. Pembroke mine at Parr was producing zinc with tin employed 12 women and 52 children in 1838. There are many other mines very local to Tywardreath, but there is absolutely no record of them apart from their names. No mining reports at all. In 1851, the census shows 2 Tywardreath widows working at Foy Consul's counting house. This is a very important part of the mine. It was the smooth running of the mine itself. The mine captain often lived in there, and it was also the reception for all the visitors to the mine. Their duties were to prepare dinner at midday for the agents, purser and mine captains, to keep the count house clean and tidy. Imagine, despite all the dust and dirt that must have come in during the day, they must ensure that ample amounts of hot water were available, ready for the captains and agents' return from underground tours, cleaning the men's boots and helmets after each visit underground, and keeping a supply of fresh, clean, protective clothing, which involved continuous laundering of duck jackets and over-trousers, and also repairs to this clothing. In 1838, a special count house dinner at Foy Consul's was arranged to celebrate the sale of a large quantity of lime. 96 people sat down in the dining room in that room. The menu included boiled and roast beef, as well as legs of mutton. Cider was provided, and the guests also drank 7 gallons of gin, rum, and brandy. This is all from a newspaper. Preparations for this feast would have required a very early start. Cleaning, laying tables, and laying fires. Cooking was done over a fire in an open hearth. The joints of meat turned on a spit, while vegetables roasted on trays underneath. Stews were prepared in cauldrons. And when all the guests had finally staggered away, the women could finally clear away, wash up, and walk home. In case of mine accidents, the injured would normally have been carried home to be cared for, but the dead were carried to the count house, or a workshop, which would have become a temporary morgue, the bodies remaining until the inquest, which was usually the next day. Thus, the women working at the count house would have had to do the laying out and prepare for the inquest. Cornwall's mining districts suffered privation and want, and the winter of 1866-67 was unusually severe in Cornwall, causing further distress, and it was aggravated by a late pilchard season. In 1867, a coal, bread and soap distress fund was set up in St Austell, Tywardreath and St Blazey. And in 1868, Tywardreath set up a soup kitchen. It was difficult to afford the nutritional standard necessary to maintain physical health, and unemployment or illness caused decline below the poverty level. Most vulnerable were young married women when they had their children or in old age. The food shortages of the hungry years of the 1840s to 1867 prompted some mine captains to sell wheat flour or bread at reduced prices. Cases of distress in the Cornish mining population were absolutely tragic. In 1867, local magistrates visited Tywardreath and found that 40 families did not possess a single blanket, while 40 others had scarcely any bedding. They found that miners went to work a 10 or 12-hour shift underground with no breakfast and their only food all day a thick slice of barley bread. Bal maidens were subsisting on a diet of fried turnips for days on end. Between 1861 and 1871, the population of Tywardreath fell by 29%. Between 1861 and 1900, 44.8% of Cornish men aged 15 to 24 had left for overseas, with 29.7% leaving for other counties. Over the same period and the same age group, 26.2% of females went overseas and 35.5% to other parts of Britain. Most men sent money home, but some families were left destitute and abandoned. Some women were obviously not receiving any or enough financial support from their husbands. Cash would be sent back with a trusted friend or enclosed with letters. But postage was an act of faith. It was unreliable, with delays caused by bad weather and shipwreck, or just going astray. Elizabeth Rundle from St. Blasey had 2 small nuggets and a gold American dollar given to her by her husband. She exchanged them with a John Trewin, who was a silversmith who also kept a general shop in the district. Harriet Shears from Tower Breath received a draft for £40 from her husband in America, half of which was for another miner's wife in the village. The 2 women went to the bank together to cash the order. However, when the draft was sent to London, it was found that the original order had already been cashed by someone who had forged Harriet's signature, and that hers was a replacement one. The 2 wives had been robbed of the money that they so urgently needed. This caused some sensation in the neighbourhood, as miners abroad often wrote home saying that they'd not had a reply for their previous letter. One woman who had not heard from her husband for several years presumed him dead, so she remarried, only later to receive a letter from him. That must have been a bit of a shock. Some men who had frequented brothels whilst abroad had the misfortune to bring back sexually transmitted diseases to their wives, which unfortunately was very common. In the close-knit mining communities where many families were interrelated, it can be difficult to distinguish between family and community help. Co-residence, or creating an extended or multiple family household, was a way to save rent. One report is of 8 to 11 people being found living in a 3-room house. In the parish of Tower Breath, the number of households containing 3 generations doubled between 1851 and 1881. And in some cases, mothers and married daughters co-resided whilst both their husbands were overseas mining, which must have caused a bit of a difficult power dynamic. As with many manual jobs, the work was hard, dirty, and poorly paid, and often done at the expense of their health and education. Balmaidens, though, did have a degree of independence and a sense of personal identity that was denied to many other women of working class and of their age. There was companionship and bonding by working together, travelling to and from work together. If they'd worked in the house as a skivvy, in a house, big house, they would almost certainly have to live in. If they worked on the farm, they also had to live in or on their own. So in fact, they had more freedom and money to spend, which other women of their time didn't have. And that's it.
Thank you, Helen. That was really illuminating as to what happened. That's right. Questions for Helen? No?
No? Yeah.
Where was Foley Consols?
Yes, it was all up behind Tower Breath towards, what do you call it? Trees Mill and Porcupine, all around that huge mine.
Thank you. Do you know anything? Your statistics for mining families was just purely the village of Towerdreth, not the
Parish.
highway and the highway?
Parish.
Would that included the highway?
Parish of Towerdreth.
Right. Would that include the highway?
Exactly.
Oh, right.
All statistics that come from the census are always parish. I could have divided it down. I did start doing it. I lost the will to live. and the research has all been done through Crescent Kernow and various publications. There's an awful lot of mining reports. Foy consuls were very good with their mining reports. They seem to enjoy paperwork. But most of the other mines, there is absolutely nothing at all. So it was mining reports, a lot of overseas mining reports, some very good books written about bower maidens, and I can recommend a book about married widows of Cornwall.
There was in the Gold Coast, hugely. The Corbin shed was known as the roader.
Yes.
No man with trousers would go in there.
No. Well, I'm afraid women did have a very, very bad reputation for bad behaviour and bad language. But a bit like wars, you have to remember that wars, their history is written by the victor, and social history is more often than not written by men.
Why were they called bower maidens?
I've no idea. I'll be honest.
The Cornish word for mine is bow.
Yeah, that's true, but they weren't all maidens, so. and they did work until really quite old age. It was normally the elder women that would work at the count house. Sometimes, some mines in their count house, the women would live in, but more often than not they had to travel to and from work. But they worked actually until quite old age and great infirmity. It was the mining industry for both men and women, and the poverty that surrounded them all was life-limiting.
You say old age, but it wasn't the old age that we know today, was it?
No, it was well, younger than both you and I.
Right, yeah.
But if you think about the problems, if you think about the problems that I've just told you about, how little has that changed for modern day? Young people are still saving rent by living at home. There are still people who can't afford the daily bread. And there are still people who don't have a blanket to cover their beds. So very little has changed.
There's a lot of vegetarians. Eating turnip.
I could live on turnip, fried turnip day after day. And while
It was sweet in your home.
no, it wasn't. No, turnips are different from sweets. No, turnips are definitely different from sweets. And barley bread is the most indigestible of breads.
Any more questions?
Was there a collapse in copper prices?
Yes, the
Which
what?
caused the exodus?
It was the collapse in copper and tin prices, and that's why there was the exodus overseas. But the exodus to other parts of the country, the miners would go to work in any other sort of mine, so they would go to coal mines and any other sort of hole in the ground. After all, what is a mine? It's a hole in the ground with a Cornishman at the bottom. But Anglesey was where a lot of the Cornish went, because an awful lot of the trade was going through Wales. So you had the trade in timber and the trade in coal. So there was an awful lot of movement. It's sort of recorded fallacy that people didn't travel very much. They travelled very widely, it just took them a long time. But, I mean, we still have problems with the post now, but normally it's because they're on strike, or there's leaves on the line, but we don't cope with shipwrecks. But some of the miners that went, literally all over the world: Australia, New Zealand, South America, North America, Africa, South Africa. But an awful lot of them did actually come back, and there was a to and fro of the men that had gone abroad to work the mines. So they didn't go and never come back unless they died, and some of them died on the way there. So they were buried at sea. And because the post was so reliable, that's why the women had no news of them. They hadn't got a clue what was going on. And some men took a wife when they were abroad. Yes, one's enough for most men.
Are there any more? Oh, yes.
I'm not being sexist, but
Go on, be sexist.
But that is very hard to believe, that fact that you said that the women moved 15 ton a day.
Yes.
I mean, there's not...
That is in the mining... That is actually in the mining reports.
Wow. Wow.
That's not hearsay in a story. It's not a romantic, it's not fiction. It is actually in the mining reports. And the barrows were designed to carry 1.5 hundredweight. But if it was wet, it weighed considerably more than that. But certainly filling the battle strips, it is actually reported in official documents. So I've not romanticised it. I don't mind you being sexist.
We do actually have a very famous person from Torridge, don't we, called John Law,
We do.
who went off to Australia to the mines, and he developed a shoe where the heel came apart and you could put your gold and your thing in there as a secret compartment. And that's how he made his money. He came back and started Lobs of London.
And where did he serve his apprenticeship?
Boy.
Yeah.
We've got to say that.
Yes.
Right, if there are no more questions, yes.
Maternity care.
No.
The women have had, you know, was there a high...
Well, no, because the women would look after themselves.
You know, I mean, was there a high incidence of infant mortality?
And also
It was?
and also maternal mortality. But then there was that in Cornwall, still existed in the 50s. The infant and maternal mortality rate in Cornwall in the 1950s was the highest in the country. But when we're talking about the 1800s, there was an awful lot of families looking after each other. There would be the woman who was good at childbirth. I mean, I certainly remember in Foy in the 50s and 60s, there were 2 women who did all the layings out. So this was something that you learnt about it from your granny or from your neighbour that did these things. They did tend to look after themselves. There wasn't anybody to go to.
Any more questions? First of all, I'd like to thank Liz and Henry and the chapel people for allowing us to use the premises tonight. Thank you very much. And for making the tea coffee. Thank you to all our speakers. Absolutely. We do have a web page called Torridge Unearthing the Past. We also have a Facebook page of Torridge, so you can have a look and see what's going on. But please look at the posters, or contact me, or Mike, or any of the committee members. And the next, oh yes, hang on. So the next committee meeting is next Thursday, number 6 here. We are also in the process of designing a history board. It's going to be on the wall across the road. That's on its way. And for those of you that bought a calendar last year, we've got a new one coming out very soon. When is it, Mike?
About a week's time.
In about a week's time. So where are we selling them?
No, we haven't decided yet. The shop almost certainly.
Shop, chapel, Liz?
But we'll put posters up and put notices on
Liz.
the website. And then the Facebook.
Yeah. Liz, can we put some in the chapel?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so we chapel. Henry says yes. So, thank you for being such a lovely audience. I wish you a safe journey home, I look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you.